The following program contains explicit Christian values. If you suffer from the notion that all views deserve respect, Randall may not be right for you. Check with a progressive.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to focus on the timeline of the last 2 years of what has happened in Egypt and why the U.S. ambassador to Egypt is now the punching bag of Christian and Muslim citizens in Egypt who don't like the Muslim Brotherhood. It's starting to get confusing. And oh, by the way, democracy's involved. But first, a word from a real fashion plate, the Granny.
It's time now for Down Home with Granny Jihad.
Allah da grappa! Boys and girls, very serious lesson. Muhammad said, whoever changed his Islamic religion, then kill him. So, do not become Christian, then I have to kill you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's show. I want to, before I do the timeline of the Muslim Brotherhood, I want to remind you that you can order 2 special, very lengthy series where you're going to learn a lot. This is for people who actually want to learn, okay? Details. What would Muhammad do? This is a large part of my work when I got my master's degree in diplomacy and international terrorism. I focused a lot of my work on Islamic terrorists and finally came to realize that they are really devout Muslims who are trying to mimic the life of Muhammad. So if you want to understand the Muslim mind, Sharia law, Islamic terrorism, see it through the eyes of Muhammad. What would Muhammad do? That's the question. And then, of course, our series on the Muslim Brotherhood, explaining, going right from the beginning of the Muslim Brotherhood, right to present, looking at their history, looking at their theologians, looking at their actions, looking at their history and their connection with terrorism. All modern Sunni Islamic terrorism, all of it, finds its taproots in the writings and the heroes of the Muslim Brotherhood. So you better believe that it impacts us. Do you understand that the people who flew the airplanes into the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon, all of them were inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood. All of them. If you've got some crazy Muslims in your city, and I don't think all Muslims are crazy, but I'm talking about the ones who really want to bring down the U.S. Constitution, implement Sharia law in the whole earth, they read the works of the Muslim Brotherhood. So you and I had darn well better believe that the Muslim Brotherhood bears in on us here at home. Okay? Don't kid yourself. All right. So anyway, get those series. You can have them for a gift of any size. If you can't afford a gift, just pay the shipping and handling. All right? And we'll send them off to you. All right, let's look at the timeline of what has happened recently in Egypt. to try and grasp where things are at and where they're headed, because there is some significant turmoil ahead. It was in late January of 2011 that the so-called Arab Spring, again, instigated and inspired by the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, that the leaders of the Arab Spring called for the ouster of Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's president who had been in power for about 30 years after the assassination of Anwar Sadat, the friend of Jimmy Carter, you might remember. So they had literally hundreds of thousands of people in the street from the end of January to the beginning of February. Hundreds of people were killed, and Mubarak ultimately on February 11th stepped down. The military took over, and the military then dissolved parliament, they suspended the constitution, and they promised that they would have just an interim government that would ultimately allow elections. So, fast forward a little bit to November of 2011 and to February of 2015. There were February 15th of 2012, that there were multi-stage elections, sometimes week-long parliamentary elections. And in the lower house, okay, we have an upper house and a lower house. We have what's called the Senate and a House of Representatives. In the lower house, the Muslim Brotherhood candidates won nearly half the seats, okay? And as I've discussed in other shows, the Muslim Brotherhood is the most organized NGO, non-government organization in the Islamic world. It doesn't even have a close second, okay? Millions of members in 70 countries. So they are very well organized, they're very articulate, and they were able to win nearly half of the seats. There were others who some people call Salafis, which took nearly a quarter of the seats. So you had in the lower house an overwhelming majority of people who are committed to the implementation of Sharia law, the imprisonment of the Christian community, the imprisonment of the church, and presumably the restoration of one Islamic nation and the caliphate, the caliph, the one guy who rules over all the Islamic world. Now the remaining seats went to some liberals, some independents, and some secular politicians. In the upper house, which has very little political power, they won almost 90% of the seats, okay? So they have been working at this since 1928. Please understand that since 1928, when the Muslim Brotherhood was founded, their first goal, their short-term goal, was to take over Egypt, and then to help take over other Muslim nations, unite them as one nation, and bring about one political leader. I've got to take a break. Break time? All right, I will take a break. We will continue with the timeline. And what's it all about, Alfie? How does it affect us? There are several ways that it affects us. The easiest to see is the importation and exportation of terrorism. My wife and I, for 5 years, have been grinding our own wheat and baking our own bread from scratch. Within 2 hours, you can have fresh wheat in your hand and then piping hot bread come out of the oven. The most nutritious and delicious bread you will ever have. And we do it for under $1 a loaf. Call Paula's Bread and find out about this grain mill and the mixer and how it can save you money and change your life. How would you like to be able to reach hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of potential customers with your product or your company or your web-based business? Well, you can do that right here on this show. Every single day, we get phone calls or letters or orders online from states all over the country where people are watching this television show. Right now, we are seen in 45 cities at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time every night, and then a rerun again at 12:30 midnight. You can reach them using this show at advertising rates that are so inexpensive, it would blow your mind. So, if you're interested, contact us at the phone number that you see on the screen or the email address, and we can talk about how you can grow your business and help support this show. Welcome back, friend. Ann Patterson is our ambassador to Egypt, and she has been largely responsible for developing U.S. policy toward the Muslim Brotherhood, because there are people in our government, certainly members of the U.S. House, and you might have even noticed a recent petition to the White House. There are a lot of people who believe that the Muslim Brotherhood is and should be deemed by the State Department as a terrorist organization. Okay? The Taliban is and was a terrorist organization who got control of Afghanistan. All right? So it's not unheard of that terrorists would control a nation. Somalia is a failed state, as they say, but there are large groups of Islamic terrorists controlling parts of Somalia and using it as a training base in an area where they can deploy from. It poses a huge problem for the U.S. if we say that a terrorist organization has seized control of the government somewhere. So what do? Let's get them legitimately elected. Sounds like the Palestinian Authority. Okay, the PLO, remember the PLO? The PLO was called the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat. That was a terrorist group that became what? Ultimately, many of their members became the Palestinian Authority. Now they hold control of a police force, of political levers of power in the Middle East, in Palestine. And, by the way, they look the other way when Hamas launches terrorist attacks against Israel. So it was a huge problem for the U.S. government to say, okay, what do we do? Egypt is probably our most stable ally in the region. It's the most populous Muslim nation. We give them billions of dollars a year in money, tons and tons of military hardware. Okay? So having a terrorist organization take over Egypt was a huge problem. So how do we do it? Let's help them. Let's have them put on a nice face. So right now, the people who want the Muslim Brotherhood out of power in Egypt, all right, Muslims who do not want these extremists, these devout Islamists, these good Muslims running the nation, right now, the face that they hate, the one that's on their posters, is, oh yes, Ann Patterson. She was largely responsible, in their eyes, of helping Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood come to power, legitimizing them. I'm going to go on a quick rabbit trail before we continue with this. This is going to upset some of you, but you have to hear me. Democracy is not an ethical system. It is not an unethical system. It is simply a system. All right? A butter knife is neither ethical nor unethical. It depends on who uses it. A butter knife could be used to stab a man in the heart and kill him, or to butter toast. So what matters are the laws of God. True, holy, righteous democracy began with Mosaic law, when God told Moses, tell the people to choose from among them elders to rule in the city gate, judges. So God said, you get to pick, but they had to swear that they would rule according to the laws of Almighty God that He gave to Moses. So if you have a democracy in your town, and a bunch of people get together and vote, true election, that they're going to take your house and your children's homes, and they're going to take 75% of your chattel property and your money. Democratic election, fair and square, right? What's the problem? It's unethical. At that point, it becomes unethical because it's against the laws of God. So the very fact that the Muslim Brotherhood won this election doesn't mean that they're legitimate, because what is legitimate is defined by what is right and just and holy and true. And the laws of God, the true God, the triune God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His laws determine what is ethical and just and holy and true, not Sharia law and Mohammed. So Ann Patterson right now, she's a bad face for America, and she is fallen into the trap that someone being elected means that they are by definition legitimate. Poppycock, Ann. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. Welcome back, friend. All right, let's speed up some of this timeline. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to have to skip forward a little bit. In May, late May of 2012, there were 13 presidential candidates. 2 of them went into a runoff, Morsi and Ahmad Shafiq, who was the last prime minister under Mubarak. Morsi, in June of 2012, June 16 and 17, he wins 51, I think, 0.7% of the vote. And at the end of the month, he takes his oath of office. Okay? Then he gets people together to try and work on their constitution. Well, some of the more liberal parties and the members of Egypt's churches, they simply withdraw. It's a 100-member assembly that's writing the constitution because they realize that the Islamists, the Salafis, if you want to call them that, the devout Muslims, the Muslim Brotherhood, is creating a constitution that will oppress people. Okay? Sharia law is inconsistent with human rights. Sharia law is damnably oppressive. It is an evil law system. It's evil. And it doesn't matter, by the way, if it's democratically elected. It's still evil because it's anti-Christ and anti-Christian. Anyway, so he gets elected, and then a bunch of people realize, oh my goodness, we're headed down a more oppressive path than we could have ever imagined. Let's bail out. Let's quit and protest. And then 3 days later, Morsi just unilaterally decrees more power for himself. Kind of has an Adolf Hitler ring. Remember, Hitler was elected, right? And then kind of nudged the elected officials to surrender their power to him to make him Fuhrer. I'm not saying that there's an exact parallel, but nevertheless, Morsi is doing a power grab. And he says that his decisions will have immunity from judicial review, and he barred the courts from dissolving the Constituent Assembly or the upper house of Parliament. So he basically says to the courts, I'm the boss, I'm the dictator, what I say goes, and anything I say, you do not have the authority to review. All right? This is Mein Kampf Mohammed style. Well, when he did that, that's when the protests against him began. All right? People started to say, whoa, 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 whoa. And in early December, more than 100,000 people marched against Morsi, demanding that they disband the referendum and the new constitution that they were trying to develop. So then the Muslim Brotherhood says, oh, no, no. And they launch attacks against those protesters. 10 people died. That was the beginning of the spiral down. Again, I'm having to skip ahead. There were hundreds of thousands of people in January of this year that held protests against Morsi on the 2-year anniversary of Mubarak, him leaving power. And again, clashes erupting all over the place. In early April, devout Muslims attacked the main cathedral of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and there were 4 Christians killed there. And the Pope of the Coptics, His Holiness Tawadros II, publicly blamed Morsi for failing to protect the building. They knew that this was coming, right? Just like Kristallnacht. The authorities knew that they were going to attack the Jewish businesses, and they looked the other way and let it happen. Morsi knew this was coming and looked the other way and let it happen. All right, I've got to take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll finish up with this timeline and just have a couple minutes to discuss where we go from here. Don't go away. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. Welcome back, friend. All right, June, this past year, just 2 months ago, people in Egypt now have, millions of them have started to just have it to hear with Morsi. They realize, oh my goodness, this man is a Muslim Brotherhood Islamist who wants Sharia law on all of us, and we don't want it. All right? They're not good Muslims. And Islam, to survive, has to have the power of the sword, has to have the power to compel people to obey, or they fear jail, beating, even death. All right? 22 million signatures were gathered, according to the news, in June to say we want Morsi out. 22 million signatures. That's almost 1/4 of the nation's population. That's an incomprehensible number, folks. All right? Then on July 1, they start doing the protests. The military says to Morsi, you've got 48 hours to figure this out, or we're going to take things into our own hands. Morsi defies them, goes on television, says, I am legitimate, I will not step down. And so the next day, the military says, well, then we'll help you. Here's the step. You're out. They depose him from power. He has been under house arrest since that time. Different envoys from Europe and from America have gone, met with him, some of them, tried to bring about a resolution. It's not happening. And now, the anti-Muslim Brotherhood forces are starting to actually gather momentum. Many of the Muslim Brotherhood are being killed by fellow Muslims, not good Muslims, all right? Muslim Brotherhood would consider them reprobate Muslims. Muslim Brotherhood people are being killed by Muslims saying, we don't want you people in power. We want some level of freedom. We don't want to live under the bondage and the tyranny of Sharia law. So as of today, there are anywhere from 900 to 1,400 civilians that have been killed, 60 churches bombed, burned, desecrated, 100 policemen dead, and untold numbers, we don't even know the numbers, of Christian businesses defaced. There's no end in sight, people. And oh, by the way, Egypt's main source of income for the nation is, guess what? Tourism. Tourism. This is going to bring about severe economic crisis for them. And you got the Saudis saying, we'll just keep pumping money into this government, 12 billion and counting, to keep it in power and to keep the Muslim Brotherhood out. The end of the matter is this. We will continue to cover this on the program, but what you need to know is that the Muslim Brotherhood is by definition a terrorist organization because it is willing to do whatever must happen to implement its political agenda, including murder, including torture, including armed revolution, and even including elections. Yes, remember the PLO, remember the Taliban, remember various people who ended up being viewed as oppressors and tyrants who came to power through democracy. It's a troubling thought. Does Obama ring a bell with anyone?